The only way is up. That's the simultaneously encouraging and lackluster prediction by many analysts for the UK's economy this coming year. So, what could it mean for a government that's on the ropes? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. After the COVID-19 pandemic and a cost of living crisis, is there light at the end of the tunnel for the United Kingdom's economy?
A new year, but the same financial problems. Experts believe, though, that the situation in the UK is improving. It had the second worst post-pandemic recovery of the G7 nations, particularly as inflation rocketed. Heading into 2024, most economists think the UK will avoid a recession. Growth, which has been flat, is predicted to pick up very slightly by 0.3%, and the price of goods is slowly falling.
That shows the government's plan for the economy is working, but nonetheless, it is very tough for a lot of families.
Everything is extortionately expensive. I'm actually shocked when I go in a shop at the cost of things, and our wages don't match how we're having to live.
The average UK resident's money doesn't go as far as it used to. Even though wages have risen, because they haven't kept up with inflation, real spending power has dropped. It's hoped that with falling prices and a decrease in interest rates by the end of the year, consumers will have more money to spend. And what the country needs is more money, money, money. This virtual ABBA show added $225 million to London's economy. An improved growth outlook will have an impact on the upcoming election, when the winner takes it all.
Well, let's meet our guests here in the studio. I'm joined by the Economist Vicky Pryce and Scarlett MccGwire, who's a former UK Labour Party advisor. And by Skype, we have Keith Pilbeam, who's Professor of International Economics and Finance at City University of London. Keith, to you first, 2024 in the UK, will it be a year of recovery or a year of recession?
Well, I think the chances of recovery are low. And the reason is that, the impact of interest rates has yet to be fully felt. And they're much higher than they were. And there's a time lag involved. And I think that, the middle of this year, we will be in recession, actually, with falling GDP for 2 quarters in a row. There are some income tax cuts, not income tax, but national insurance tax cuts that will sort of keep up a bit of demand. But the trouble is, we've got more and more of our money is being devoted to interest on the national debt as well. So the government is very constrained in what it can do. Can we really even do the tax cuts that have recently been come into place in January? The answer is no. I mean, fiscal prudence is what is needed. We've still got a very big budget deficit. And the interest on that deficit has been going up with interest rates in general because the British government was not very clever. They didn't borrow at fixed rates of interest. A lot of our debt is actually at floating rates of interest, and so actually goes up with inflation and interest rates. So we are in a bit of a bind. There's not much can be done on the fiscal front to get us out of it. On the monetary front, we've had far too much loosening. We've had 10 years of very low interest rates. That inevitably led to some inflation, and the party ended on that. So we can't go back to that. And I don't think the markets would accept lower interest rates, to be honest. A lot of people think, the Bank of England can cut interest rates. Well, they probably can a little bit, but you've got to be very careful not to upset the bond markets now, because a lot of people have lost a lot of money as interest rates went up, and they didn't expect them to go up so fast. And the credibility of the Bank of England is extremely low. So we've got a real problem because we don't have much manoeuvre on either the fiscal or monetary front, to be honest. And Brexit, of course, has taken a lot of the dynamism out of the British economy. People can deny it, but we know that it's a long-term negative for the UK. And a lot of our problems stem from that. Even the lack of investment is all related to Brexit. We've got less foreign direct investment. People are less interested in investing in the UK. Because of Brexit, we don't have that open European market that we used to have. We've got trade frictions. There is bureaucracy and paperwork. So we're not an attractive place to invest either. And you need investment to get economic growth. So I honestly can't see an easy way out of it. And this current government lacks a lot of credibility. It's certainly improved over Liz Truss. There's no doubt about that, and Boris Johnson. But it's more just sort of, managing through and not really having any policy to get out of this. I think there is a recognition we need to get economic growth back into the British economy. But there's no easy solution to that unless you concentrate, I would say, more on the supply side.
Thanks, Keith. Vicky, it's quite a bleak picture. Would you agree with his assessment of the year ahead?
I agree with quite a lot about the Brexit impacts, without any doubt. But I think about the rest, I'm not too sure. I think what's going on in the markets is they're already assuming, and they're very happy with interest rates coming down. They're assuming that the central bank, the Bank of England, is going to reduce interest rates a number of times through the year, a little bit like what is expected in the US, what is expected in Europe. So you see that already reflected in the mortgage rates, which have come down quite significantly. The yields on 2-year, 5-year and 10-year bonds, which have come down again, which ease some of the pressure the government has in terms of financing its deficit and its overall debt. And I think there is room, certainly, for cutting interest rates because inflation is coming down so significantly. Yes, of course, we're concerned about what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean. Even the OPEC price cuts, production cuts, have not had any serious impact on prices, oil prices at all. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case. So for the moment, I think the world is seeing deflation coming out of China. It's seeing deflation in some of the countries in Europe where inflation has come down so significantly. I mean, there are countries like Belgium which have had deflation now, prices falling for a number of months. For a period, we also had that in the Netherlands. So there is absolutely no reason why interest rates cannot come down more generally. And frankly, in terms of the fiscal side, the fiscal rules are made by government. And we've already seen the cut in national insurance contributions. The government is, of course, collecting huge amounts of extra tax because of the freezing of personal allowances. But there will no doubt be more tax cuts coming in the budget, which is early, March the 6th here in the UK, in anticipation of an election later in the year. So my view is that, yes, both on the monetary and the fiscal side, there could be a bit of relaxation, which will give a little bit of a breathing space for the economy.
Scarlett, the tax cuts that have been mentioned, these are all politically driven, aren't they? I mean, given the state of the UK debt, they shouldn't be cutting taxes, but they're going to.
No, of course they're politically driven. I mean, one could call them an election bribe to try and get people to vote for the government to say, see, we are doing well, you are going to do better. And there's a real problem because you have to pay for tax cuts. And what they say is, well, we won't hit health or education, we'll hit the others. But you look at somewhere like local government is barely surviving.
Some of them have gone bust.
Well, local councils have gone bust.
Yeah.
And others, they say, some is statutory, so things like adult services, children's services, statutory. So yesterday, Idris Elba, the actor, was saying, what we need is youth clubs because of the knife crime. But youth clubs are closing because they're not statutory, because they're not. So actually, we can't afford anything. And there we are going
Cutting
for tax cuts.
Just tell me, you're so switched on in terms of what's happening with the political scene. Sunak's future all hinges on the economy, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the question for everybody, and the Labour Party will be asking this, is, are you feeling richer or poorer than when these people got into power?
And what's the answer, do you think?
Well, the answer at the moment is unquestionably poorer. I mean, all the statistics say, and remember, we're halfway through a winter. We've got terrible gas and electricity prices. We've got, appalling numbers of people going to food banks. But people who are supposedly reasonably well off are feeling the pinch. So what the Conservatives are desperate to say is, we will do better, you can do better with us. And Labour is sitting back and going, they're terrible.
Yeah. Keith, Is that a good assessment of Sunak's future that, you know, unless this UK economy picks up quite dramatically very quickly, he's toast?
I think he is toast, even if the economy was to recover. There's clearly a change in the electorate. There's a lot of people that were sold Brexit would be a success. There's no way you can say it's been a success. Even Brexiteers are now blaming it on the implementation of Brexit, which is an admission that it's a failure. So people have been sold something and it didn't work out for them. You know, I remember Patrick Minford saying we get a 20% increase in GDP. I mean, the idiocy of that is just remarkable. I mean, you could check it if you don't believe me. So the thing is that, you know, this government lacks credibility. You've had the Liz Truss, you've had the Boris Johnson. There's no credibility. Now, Rishi was actually very popular when he was doling out the money, but he didn't spend the money wisely, OK? We know that he spent far too much during COVID. You know, business loans that are not being repaid, 23 billion. I mean, these are staggering amounts of money, 10 billion wasted on PPE. And so what I think's happened is that the party that started the Brexit has come home to destroy that party, interestingly, because it doesn't, with no economic growth, there's no dynamism in the British economy, and the fiscal situation is dire. And that's all related to Brexit again, because if you reduce the size of the economy, let's say we're 4% smaller than we would otherwise be, well, when you do the maths on that, you know, we've got maybe 50% of that could be recovered in taxes. So you're falling about 80 billion a year tax loss. And that's huge. That means you haven't got money to make public sector wage settlements, improve the National Health Service, you know, the potholes, or give local government the money they need for an ageing population. So, in fact, you know, the Tories started Brexit, and Brexit is now coming out, that monster, to eat up that party. And I think they're doomed. And I think they're not just doomed for one election. I think they may be doomed forever, because the younger people will never forgive them for Brexit. And the older people that supported Brexit are dying off, many of them because they're not getting the proper medical treatment. So Brexit is actually, that monster started by Boris Johnson has actually come home to gobble up the Tory party, actually. And I say no way back for them in the next election or the election afterwards, and possibly permanently. I mean, they are facing one of the biggest electoral defeats in history. If what happens, you know, these polls continue the way they do. And I don't see them narrowing, because Sunak is probably going to leave it to the last possible moment. He's in power. He's only going to be Prime Minister once. He knows that. So you might as well stay as late as you can. But the longer he stays, the worse it looks.
Vicky, every single Conservative leader comes in as Prime Minister and they talk about driving up growth. None of them ever manage it. What is the obstacle here? What do you think is the main problem? That, you know, they seem obsessive about growth and yet we're flatlining.
Well, we're not talking about a period from 2010. Of course, we had the financial crisis just before. We had a period of austerity. During that austerity, under previous prime ministers, we ended up with very low productivity growth, whereas before there was quite a lot of productivity growth before the financial crisis, and that hasn't really recovered. And then we had Brexit and the referendum vote, which of course stopped quite a lot of foreign investment coming in because people were worried about what the implications would be for growth in the UK economy. And of course, it became a sort of vicious circle because you ended up with no new investment and therefore no growth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, we left, and that hasn't really led to anything very great. And you've seen so many firms stopping trading with, particularly small firms, with Europe, which, of course, is right there next door to us. It had allowed for all sorts of expansions to take place for firms, not having any worries about employing people, selling things without any restrictions. Well, all that, of course, has sort of come to an end, even though there are no tariffs directly for goods. So I think it's productivity and investment that is doing it. But of course, we mustn't forget there have been other issues. There's been COVID, which affected large parts of the world. We've had the energy crisis, and we look what's going on right now in Germany, which is in recession. So we haven't been unaffected by all these things. So we need to add that to the mix, and you end up with the possibility of growth not really being there. And I think it's correct what we've been hearing, that the debt situation is an issue, but it's an issue for loads of other countries too. But it also, if you are discouraging business, and there was a period when Boris Johnson made it very clear he didn't really care about business, at all, you end up with confidence falling and no investment taking place.
Other countries have had the exact same challenges of COVID, and yet they've bounced back quicker. I mean, Britain is really struggling.
Well, they haven't really bounced back quicker, I have to say. On the COVID front, we have to just watch it because, yes, of course, the US and up to a point for a while, China. But of course, China is now not really growing. And the US did quite well, even during the energy crisis, but mainly because it's quite self-sufficient. Didn't really worry too much. The prices didn't rise anything like as fast that the households had to pay, and also the gasoline prices and so on, because they could produce quite a lot of it themselves. So they did bounce back a bit earlier than others. But you see quite a large part of Europe still struggling, frankly. So it has been an issue which is very widespread. But the problems that we have here in the UK are sort of more ingrained because this productivity issue is still with us. And what's happened with those crises is that it's made it worse. Whereas at least you could assume that other countries will eventually bounce back better because they have this underlying sort of ability to get sort of investment happening and productivity to grow. And we seem to have lost the art of doing so.
Well, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the man who wants his job, Keir Starmer of Labour, they've both been out this week talking about the economy. Let's just have a listen.
We'll be introducing a significant tax cut for millions of people in work, worth on average £450 for an average worker. Because we've halved inflation, we want to keep managing the economy well and cutting people's taxes.
If they want to fight on the economy, if they still think in some fantasy land that this is strong territory for them, they don't realise how much we've turned the tables now. They don't realise just how poor a card that is for them to play.
Scarlett, Keir Starmer's got a good point there, hasn't he? This is fertile ground to start attacking the Conservatives on, the economy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what everybody knows is they are worse off now than they used to be. And there is a minimal amount of growth, and we have no idea what's going to happen for the rest of the year. We know that Rishi Sunak is praying that something happens. But I mean, yes, and also the British people want an election. They are absolutely fed up with the Conservatives. I mean, all the polling shows they want an early election. The later Rishi Sunak goes, the more he's going to be fenced in by circumstances, which is why he's trying to give himself leeway. But actually, I mean, you know, Labour is absolutely ready for it, and the polls are with Labour at the moment.
For Sunak, I'm curious about this. Him waiting until October, November, is this all about having 2 clear years on a CV that he can say? Is it that egotistical?
I think that that's a bit cynical. I think that he's hoping something will turn up.
Like what?
I mean, I don't know, like growth, like Keir Starmer doing something terrible. I mean, what he's hoping is that something is going to change. And that's what he's been hoping since he got in. Since he got in, his people have been saying, he's going to be different. This is going to be different. But the problem is the one thing he doesn't give us is stability. So in September, he talks about, his predecessors and how bad, and 30 years of the Tories not really working. And then he hires David Cameron as his foreign secretary. So nobody has any idea what his long-term strategy is, apart from to try and win the election. But it's just not working.
Keith, some Conservative critics would argue that perhaps Labour can't be trusted with the economy. I mean, could they make a better job of it?
Well, they can hardly make a worse job, can they? I mean, that's the point. The Conservatives have shown themselves to be remarkably inept at economic management in the last 13, 14 years. I mean, they haven't produced anything. And Sunak lacks competence, to be honest. He dresses very smartly, that's true, speaks quite smoothly, but fundamentally has made some very, very poor decisions. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer that enabled this national debt to spiral out of control and spent money like water. And now he's facing the consequences of that. And he didn't spend the money wisely. And so Labour, really, so long as they show a bit of competence and they're giving all the right signals, they don't want to upset the markets. I mean, Britain is in a precarious state and our fiscal situation is not good. We've still got too big a budget deficit this year. But so long as they sound competent, that they want to invest, improve people's living standards, but they've still got a problem. How are you going to pay for this green 28 billion they're supposed to come up and various investments that they would like to do. So they will need to borrow money and they don't want to upset the markets. So they need to have a real big think about the situation, how they're going to finance this Labour. But I just don't think the Tories have got any credibility. I think it just went with Liz Truss, and I think you have those pivotal moments. And no matter what you do to recover, you will never recover until you're out of office. And undertake some massive reforms that the Tories need. And I suppose it all goes back to Brexit in a way, because Boris Johnson put a load of incompetent people in charge of the party. He's pretty incompetent himself, and then probably chose a lot of people that were even more incompetent than him. And Sunak has not proved to be very competent. He's made very poor economic decisions for this country.
And
So
Keith, just on that point, when Johnson left, along came Liz Truss. Her crazy economic view of the world, mortgage rates started to rocket month on month. A lot of people watching will be asking the question or wanting an answer to, when is my mortgage going to get less?
And the truth is, it's not going to go down much, because that period of very low interest rates, distorted by heavy central bank buying of government bonds, and that's over. And the markets are never going to allow those low interests, especially now we've got bigger national debts to finance. And people want, there's a bit more risk now of inflation because, you can monetize your debt if you're not prepared to cut government expenditure and raise taxes. So I don't think we're ever going back to those absurdly low interest rates ever again. I just don't see that happening again. Because the markets, a lot of people have lost a huge amount as those interest rates have gone up to towards 4.5% at times. So those days of very low interest rates, they were an aberration. You can do quantitative easing, but we've done enough of that now. And even the central banks realise that, you can't continue just printing money all the time.
Vicky, just on that point about interest rates, I've read reports that maybe May for the first cut. What's your thoughts?
I think it's quite likely. If we're looking at an election happening in the autumn, then I'm sure that Rishi Sunak would be hoping that this would be the case, because, inflation seems to be, as I was saying earlier, going down across the world. Yes, there may be the odd month when things start, looking a little bit more dangerous, only because of what's happening internationally, and lots of subsidies which were given to households being removed and also to businesses across Europe. But you see this overall, except of course there are problems now in the Red Sea, but generally what you've seen is that supply chains have improved. Yes, of course we have the problem right now, but they go back to normal. Freight rates had gone down very significantly, so things are arriving in shops. And we had input costs go down quite significantly for firms. So I don't think the situation is as dire as perhaps some of the monetarists would have been expecting it to be. Plus, we've just been hearing about money supply and quantitative easing. Frankly, money supply is falling right now, and that's a real worry. Money supply falling means deflation coming in the future unless you do something about it. And even the US is now beginning to talk about stopping quantitative or easing quantitative tightening. In other words, selling those bonds back in the market, which is what they've been doing, because they're worried about what the impact of all this will be on growth, interest rates and growth. And that's an issue. So there is a bit of a move again to think perhaps we've overdone it with interest rates. And I'm just hoping that the Bank of England, frankly, will see it that way as well and won't worry too much if there is the occasional increase in inflation that we're bound to see on a monthly basis, at various times over the next few months.
Scarlett, cost of living crisis, how tough is it out there right now for people with mortgages, with bills to pay in the UK?
It's incredibly tough. It's so bad that so every year people have to renew their about a third of the people renew their mortgages, and so we haven't had the Liz Truss mortgage appallingness is still with us, because there's a whole load of people who are going to have to renew their mortgages this year. And actually, what happened is that in January more houses went on the housing market than ever before. And it is thought that it's a lot of people who looked around and said, we just can't afford to redo our mortgage.
So these are people who simply can't afford to stay in the home that they've bought.
Yeah, and will downsize, will go for a cheaper house. I mean, there are real problems about, and we keep on sort of acting as though this was all last year, but actually nothing's got better this year. I mean, Heating bills are still very high. We're in the middle of a really, really cold spell at the moment. Gas and electricity bills are phenomenal. What's happening in the Red Sea is affecting food, which is it's the basics that are going up. And inflation coming down just means that prices go up more slowly. It doesn't mean they come down, and that's the problem.
Keith, we love to end on a positive on Roundtable. Any positivity out there this year with the UK economy?
Well, the only positive is getting rid of this government at some point during the year, because we cannot continue with such incompetence. It's just diabolical, lack of credibility. So a new coming Labour administration would at least give some hope of change.
Keith, Scarlett, Vicky, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable, TRT World, and hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.